4 sessions. This is the second session. We're going to be exploring how monitoring, evaluation, and learning, I'm going to call it MEL because it's faster, can move beyond measurement. And it can become a tool for reflection, adaptation, and real systems change. So from UNDP and as UNDP, we are extremely keen on practitioners like you really getting to use these tools and approaches and applying them in practice. So we're excited to be able to provide this opportunity to dive deeper on the MEL 360 website and explore these tools and approaches together. So to begin, I am going to walk us through the webinar series. So in module 1, for those of you who participated, we started with the foundations. So we started talking about what is systems MEL, why it matters, and how to use the orientation lens to set direction and intent. In module 2, this module, we're going to wrap up the orientation lens and move on to the spiral, which is a continuous learning cycle that supports learning and adaptation. Module 3 is going to be more hands-on. We're going to explore some of the MEL tools that we have developed, and we'll actually, oh, I haven't shared my screen yet. Of course. Can you all see my screen?
Yes,
Amazing.
perfectly.
Perfect. Yes. So in module 3, we will get to explore some of the tools, we call them how-to sheets, that we have developed as part of the MEL 360 website. And you will actually get to pick at the end of this session which how-to sheets are prioritized. And in module 4, we're going to come together for an interactive Ask Me Anything, where you get to bring your cases, your challenges, and also adaptations from your own context. So again, we hope that this is very participatory, that it's a space to connect with your peers, to share what's working, and to co-create what systems MEL looks like in practice. So I will pass it on to my colleague Fede to walk us through the community guidelines, which some of you might have seen already, but we'll do it very brief for the new participants.
Thank you, Andrea. If you can, thank you very much. So as you are seeing, we are recording this session, and we will do also for the upcoming sessions. In case you would like to intervene by raising your hands, please, and you don't want to appear in the recording, please feel free to turn off your camera. Otherwise, we really encourage you to turn on your camera. And please, while not speaking, we kindly ask you to mute yourself, as well as be respectful in your feedback that you can share also via the chat today, as well as during the breakout room activity. Also, please feel free, as I said, to share your ideas via the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. Also, for this session, we will have a breakout room activity. In case your preferred language is English or any other language, we are trying to accommodate the breakout room by your preferred language. So if you would like to have another language that is not English, please feel free to go to the participant list and look for your name. You will find 3 dots, and you can click on rename yourself. And from that on, you can add your preferred language. For instance, as I'm adding Spanish, you will see. And from there on, I will try to arrange you to a breakout room. We really hope that we can offer these, and we will try our best to do so. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Fede. Wonderful. So let's get started with module 2. What is our path for today? We're going to start with a quick recap of module 1, and we'll invite a few reflections from your take-home assignment on the strategic intent. Then we're going to move into the domains of change, and we're going to work through them with a participatory exercise. After that, we're going to explore system boundaries and spheres which will help us clarify our scope and our role. And then we will enter the spiral, this learning cycle that ties all of these pieces together in practice. So before we get started, I did want to mention that some of you, perhaps many of you, are already doing systems MEL in practice. You're experimenting with these approaches or with parts of these. And this training, this guidance is really about bringing this practice together in a cohesive but also flexible framework. So as we walk through this, we encourage you to take this as a flexible path you can follow, but also that you can enter at any point in your learning journey or in your practice. And we will talk a little bit more about that when I do a brief recap of the framework. But now it is time for you to see a very brief demo of the website where my colleague Bianca will point you to some strategic areas of the website that you might need today for your participatory exercise. So on to you, Bianca.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks everyone for being here. It's great to see how so many people joining. Can you see my screen just to confirm? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So here we're showing the MEL 360 guidance, which is the website that we shared before in the chat. And quickly, just to share how this is structured, so you can follow it and also use it on your own. So we have five main sections. The homepage, which is this one, where we explain why we're doing this. And basically, it's to integrate systems informed monitoring, evaluation, and learning into our work, right? So we can also have that layer and use MEL as a tool to adapt in complex systems. And then here you will see also what you will find here, which is the general MEL guidance, the food systems toolkit, and practical resources and tools, what we call the how-to sheets, and other resources from different people working on this field. Also, you will find who this is for and more like intro information. Then on top here, we have three main sections: the general guidance, the food systems toolkit, and the resources. And then we have the about section, which talks about the initiative and how we did all this work. So if you go to the general guidance, you will have some subsections where you can start reading about why we think systems thinking should be applied to MEL. We also include some principles for you to follow while you are doing this work. And then we have these two main components that we are learning a lot about during this training: the orientation lens and the spiral, right? So then when you go to the food system toolkit, it's pretty much structured the same way, but here we put a lot of examples about how you implement that in the food system context. So you will have how, what is this food systems toolkit, how you use it. Then we also have some case studies here. When you go to the food system toolkit, we have two case studies about implementing systems MEL in Peru and Kenya. So you can ground yourself and see some real examples. And we also have the orientations lens and the spiral as well. And when you go to resources, you will have here 360 systems MEL tools, where you will find the how-to sheets of the step-by-step of how you use different tools that we are recommending here. And also we have a tool selector, which is a longer list of tools that you could use in each of the stages that we're going to explain later when you use a spiral or the orientation lens. So going deeper into the general guidance, as I said before, we have why systems thinking in MEL, and then you have some accordions, that this is how we call this, where you can then open and jump into the section and read more. And I just want to go, okay, to show you the orientation lens, which is the lens that you use when you are designing and also implementing to position yourself within the system and to have that systems and mindset, systems thinking mindset. So you have the strategic intent, system boundaries, spheres of control, domains of change, which my colleague Andrea is gonna explain later. And then here if you want to read about what those are and all the information to understand them, you open the different accordions. But here, I just want to go to the domains of change to see deep, because that's the first component that we're going to study today. So when you open this section here, remember, go to the general guidance orientation lens. You will go to domains of change, and then you will see what those are. You're going to read the definition, and then you're going to understand and have a brief definition of each of the domains of change we're proposing here. We take in our MEL approach, the mindsets, behavior, practices, relationship, institutions, and rules, resources flow, power dynamics, right? And then you keep reading, because we propose that when you analyze and use this domains of change during your MEL work, you zoom out to see how these are in the system, in the broader system where you are working. And then you zoom out, zoom out to see the broader system, and you zoom in, looking how these things are changing within your project or your program or portfolio. So here, if you keep going down, you will find an interactive picture where you can select each one of those, and then you can read how you zoom in and you what those means for you, why they matter, why we need to track some of those, and some guiding questions. So yeah, keep this in mind, because we're gonna do an exercise later where you will need to refer to this section on the domains of change. And remember that, as I said before, the Food Systems Toolkit has a very similar structure where you go to, for example, the orientation lens, and then you have a bunch of examples and way to see them through the food systems, like examples. So I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna pass it over to my colleague, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Bianca, for that deep dive on the website. So remember, and we also shared the link on the chat, you might need to use the domains of change exploration tool during the exercise that's coming up in just a bit. So please feel free to explore that as you're discussing in your groups. But before we go into that, we did want to start with a very quick recap of the strategic intent take-home assignment that you all had, and then present that concept very briefly for those of you who are joining for the first time on this session. So give me a reaction, those of you who did the homework. Thumbs up or any other Zoom reaction just to see. Wonderful. Okay, amazing. Great to see the people completed the assignment. And so just for those of you who are not part of the first session, we asked participants to draft their strategic intent, including who would stand to benefit the most from that long-term vision of transformation and how, and also which values and principles could guide this change. So now we do want to invite a couple of participants to share, and we included some prompts, some reflection questions around what the strategic intent drafting process helped clarify for you, what felt easy or hard about defining this long-term purpose in your work, and how do you see your strategic intent connecting to the work you are doing now. So we invite participants to pick one of these questions, and if anyone wants to share, you can raise your hand or you can include your reflection in the chat just to see how this exercise resonated with you or not. So happy to hear that. Yes, I see Hina Tariq raising her hand. Please go ahead. And then Sylvia Rossi.
Hi, hello. Hi, hello. So basically, in my organization, we don't really use systems MEL at all. We're currently still very much doing regular MEL. So when the assignment made me kind of think about the strategic intent, it made me realize how focused we were on short-term goals as to numbers of people reached and people who will access primary healthcare. But there was currently, because you get so caught up in getting the program started and then to meet those metrics, there was really no conversation being held as to how will that translate into long-term impact. So I think being part of an LMIC Pakistan, I think that's one of the big problems as to why we haven't made as much progress as we should have. So I think it just made me really come to terms with the fact that you really have to have that conversation for it to create that change that you actually wanted to be creating. That's all.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reinforcing the fact that it is a conversation, right? We don't define the strategic intent on our own. It is a conversation that we need to have with our broader organization and ideally also the stakeholders that are involved in our work. So thank you for that reflection. Sylvia Rossi, if you want to chime in, please.
Sure. Thank you. No, I think my challenge was initially to do it alone. But then what I did on Friday, I actually gathered all the key internal stakeholders, let's say, and I did not follow, exactly the structure because I'm not familiar enough. But what I did, I wrote the statement afterwards, and having had access to really the experts in my team, it was a lot easier. So I think it helped clarify really the team objective and not just mine. And I had something in mind that thought was correct, and broadly it was. But I mean, it was probably not contextualized enough. That's it. I know all this is meant to do it, with your team or with other stakeholders. I can just say that doing it together really helped, making it, easier to draft. Otherwise, it remained a little theoretical for me. Over.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. That's a wonderful reflection, and we are so happy to hear that you were able to gather the key experts in your team and you were able to ground what you were thinking for a strategic intent with these experts. And again, I really commend you for adapting the tool because that's what we want, right? We suggest a structure, we suggest the prompts, but it is for you, for your teams to take these tools and adapt them to what serves your purposes. So that's wonderful to hear. And then last intervention from the audience, Mary Sue, if you please want to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I worked on, in my homework, I used the work that we had done within our organization to try to promote systems approach and systems thinking in all of the malpractice in countries, in the teams, in the countries and regions, and advocacy teams and others. And there were two things that struck me really quite a lot. One was, because we were working with teams who have projects and programs that they're working on, we didn't ever articulate that our purpose as a team was to ensure that our MEL system was being transformed. And that I discovered this when I was looking at the principles again, and the importance of acting within the whole, and how we had not really articulated the points of pressure and our MEL system where we needed to be sure that we were addressing the work that needed to be done in terms of relationships and power structures and the boundaries and all of that kind of stuff. I think we were doing some of it intuitively, but not all of it. And it would have been better and stronger if we had done that. But we were so focused on supporting the teams so that they could do their work with their programs and projects that we didn't pay attention to the own system that we were trying to assess. And the second thing that really struck me, and this struck me as you were talking last time, is that you are looking at a system in the sense of trying to make it healthier, a food system that needs to be healthier. Whereas we were looking at systems in the sense of what unjust systems are we are we designing our work to try to dismantle? And I just wondered, I had a lot of questions about, did we do this the whole wrong way? Or is this just the way that we're framing our programming? And so I had a question that's unresolved still there, but it was very thoughtful. The whole process of the homework was very thoughtful. So thank you.
Thank you for that reflection, Mary Sue. And there's different ways that we can frame our challenges, right? So again, what we offer is a flexible framework with some prompts that you can take, but absolutely do what works best in your context. But happy to hear that the homework and the content are sparking interesting reflections for you. Let's move on now. So this is going to be familiar for those of you who were part of the first session. Can you all see my screen by any chance? Just making sure.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you. So just before we move into the content for today, we did want to take a few minutes to remind ourselves of the overall MEL 360 framework so that everyone is grounded, including those who are joining for the first time. So very briefly, we have crafted this, again, flexible framework with two parts in mind, the orientation lens and the spiral. The orientation lens helps teams get grounded before diving into implementation, before diving into action. And last time we focused on the first part of that orientation lens, as you all know, the strategic intent. And today we're going to continue with the other pieces. We're going to continue with domains of change, and then we will talk about system boundaries and the spheres of control, influence, and interest. Importantly, these pieces are not meant to be followed in a strict sequence. Teams can move through them or between them as needed. And then later in the session, we're going to be looking at the spiral of systems change. And we say that this is a learning loop that teams use during implementation to reflect, adjust, and stay aligned with their purpose. And very importantly, and as my colleague Bianca shared, each of these lenses and areas is accompanied by tools that we call how-to sheets that show you, for example, if you are doing surface patterns here, you will have accompanying how-to sheets or tools that show you how to track domains of change, how to track signals of change, how to craft systems-informed indicators, among others. So we will walk through them a little bit towards the end of the session. And also, and again, this might be familiar for many of you, we are going to be using a real case study or a case study that is inspired in a real world project that we call the Kenya Drylands Project. So we are going to be exemplifying our tools and concepts and approaches with this lens. So last session, we saw how the Kenya Drylands Project layered systems MEL into their ongoing work. But how did this project start? The initiative started with a focus on inputs, new crops, boreholes, and market links. This type of project might be familiar to many of you. And on paper, the approach looked strong. Yields were improving, incomes were rising. However, there were deeper issues that were surfacing over time. Like boreholes were breaking, women were left out of decision making, land and water tensions were growing, and charcoal stayed as a fallback option. With this picture in mind, the Kenya Drylands team paused and asked why these positive results on paper were not adding up to stronger resilience, to stronger health of the system. And that strategic pause that the team took actually opened the door to integrating systems MEL. And notice that we say integrating because we never talk about replacing your M&E framework, your M&E system, but it's how do you integrate layers of systems MEL to add depth, to add a systems change perspective to your work. So what they did is that they co-developed a shared long-term vision or strategic intent with communities, and they began looking at trust, relationships, and local leadership, not just at outputs. They conducted regular community forums and check-ins, which helped them adjust their work as conditions were shifting. And over time, there were clear changes, there were clear shifts emerging. They saw women in governance roles, they saw the creation of youth marketing groups, they saw agroforestry expanding, and less reliance on charcoal. And even during a major water drought, communities relied on local strategies instead of waiting for external help. So we're bringing this case back because we'll use it throughout this module to ground the domains of change and the different tools on the spiral. Before we dive in the domains of change, I want to remind you that my colleagues have shared on the chat the slide deck of this presentation. You actually have more slides than I will show right now because due to time, we had to pick some strategic ones, but you can look at the slides at your own pace. So for instance, if you need more details on the Kenya case study, you will find the slides there as well. And in some of the tools, you will also find more theory and conceptual framing in your slide deck. So we hope that you can also use that as a resource. We really drafted it thinking of it as a summary of the MEL 360 guidance. So we hope you find it helpful. And now we're going to be looking at the domains of change. So this may look familiar to some of you. Does anyone find it familiar? Give me a reaction if you've seen these domains of change before or similar frameworks. Amazing. Amazing. Okay. That's good. We find that every time we present the domains of change, these are highly contested because people say, well, no, I use this other domain, I use this other framework, and that is perfectly fine. We picked this because we wanted to ground them in literature, so they are adapted from the Waters of Systems Change framework, but there's other domains in place. So we know, for instance, that the Global Environmental Facility works with transformation levers, and that is wonderful. This is an adaptable framework that you can take if it serves you, or you can use your own domains or dimensions of change. But let's explain this one. So these domains of change show where transformation tends to unfold in complex systems. And they go from mindsets, which are the shifts in beliefs and assumptions that happen, behaviors and practices, what are people doing differently, relationships and networks, which are, for instance, collaboration and trust, institutions and rules, which are the norms, roles, or policies that shape your context, resource flows, we can talk about access to input, services, and knowledge, and power dynamics, who shapes decisions and whose voice counts. So why do these matter? We say that they matter because traditional MEL often focuses on outputs, what we deliver, right? Whereas the domains of change help us look at what is actually shifting in the system, what is underlying, and what are sometimes these invisible shifts. So they support design and learning by helping teams ask, what domains are we actually trying to influence? Where are shifts reinforcing each other or getting blocked? And let me just share a very brief example to ground this in practice. For instance, if there is an initiative on agroforestry, if they start training the farmers, that will trigger a behavior shift. But this behavior shift is not going to last if resource flows such as seedlings, inputs, or extension services aren't reliable. It will not stick if institutions such as land rights aren't supportive, or if buyers, policymakers, and farmers are seeing agroforestry as a viable and valuable alternative, which is a shift in mindsets. So these domains of change really help you see those connections early before things stall, and it helps you design for greater impact. Very importantly, many of us, and perhaps most of us, are working on pieces of these domains, whether formally or informally. I've seen many teams working on building relationships, but are you actually tracking that? So what these domains of change do is bring those pieces to the front so they can actually and directly shape design, learning, and tracking of results. And so what we like to say as well is that typically one domain on its own doesn't trigger a shift in the system or makes the strategic intent achievable. Transformation really happens when several domains of change start to move together and then they work towards a strategic intent. So now that we've walked through these domains of change, let's put them in practice. So you will get to work in groups. My colleague Fede is going to create the breakout groups in just a moment. But as you can see on the slide, we're going to be inviting you to think about Kenya's strategic intent, which is written right there, and think about what domains of change would need to be triggered for the strategic intent to become a reality. So again, as you know, this initiative began with productivity, but the wider system included water stress, gender inclusion, land tensions, etc. So very importantly, this task is not about choosing the right answer. Different groups are going to inevitably land on different domains of change, and that is expected. So we drafted some prompts to help you with the discussion in your groups. The priority question is the first one, the one that's bolded. Which domains of change need to shift for the strategic intent to become real? If you only have time to discuss this, to discuss this one, that's great. That's the main one. If you do have time, we invite you to think about what are the biggest barriers or constraints in the system. And this helps you think about which domains are most stuck. And then, again, if you have time, think about 2 to 4 domains of change that this initiative could realistically influence. And this is important to highlight that this is different from the first priority question, which is asking about domains of change in general, whereas the third one is asking where could this initiative realistically influence? And this is going to help us shape our contribution to the strategic intent. Okay? And then if you have time, you can identify one domain where progress could unlock shifts in other domains. And this helps you think about leverage, where one change can ripple across the. Welcome back. We hope you had a rich discussion. We were peeking in some of your conversations and heard some interesting reflections. But I will pass it on to my colleague Sue now, who will invite a reflection from the participants. Are you there, Sue?
Yes, thanks, Andrea. Welcome back, everyone. Hi. I popped into a couple of rooms and really enjoyed listening to what you all were sharing and how you are perceiving the domains of change. I'm curious if anyone wants to share how this exercise landed for them, what it made you think about, how it helped you orient the example with some of the material from the strategic intent. Any hands? Any thoughts? Emojis? That was not long enough, says Kate. Yes, yes, we know. We'll continue in the next breakout. One of the last groups I peeked into was, I think, group 17. Heather and Florian were having an interesting discussion on how, as I interpreted, where the domains of change were positioning them, would position the initiative vis-a-vis the community, and the fact that, we are the domains of change are very much zoomed out, or looking at, the project in a 10, 20-year span, especially if you're starting with a strategic intent, which is quite long term, and how to explain that to the community, and especially with farmers who are like, we're trying to get things sorted by tomorrow, or we need a good yield for next season. I wonder, Heather, if you had any thoughts to share on that particular reflection, because I found that striking. If you want to share.
Thanks, Sue. I think that was more Florian's reflection, so I will cede the floor to Florian. But I think if I would add one thing that really struck me from the conversation, it was that you can make assumptions about, and I know nothing about Kenya or drylands, and so we were just making these assumptions willy-nilly about what would be the domains that would need to move. But I think really strongly it reinforced that you can make those assumptions about what will be important and what will influence, but then it will be, as I think we'll come to in the spiral, the learning about actually what is happening in that domain. Like how can the community become more resilient against drought or conflict, etc.? What is it? Is it power dynamics? Is it resource flows? Like actually what is it? So it gives you the domains to pay attention to, but not like the formula of this is definitely how it's going to play out at that planning stage. So I really appreciated working through that and kind of changing my mental model about it. But Florian, your point was the great one. So please go ahead on that one.
Thank you. No, I don't think, I don't think I have anything to add in particular regarding that point. I mean, I think those domain of change, if we look at your question, they are probably all right. I mean, we could have selected any of them. I think we thought that it was a bit of the chicken and egg question by where to start, and I think at the end it is important to then consider what is realistic for your project and your intervention. Obviously, there won't ever be a single project that can address all the drivers or the bottleneck or the problem that need to be solved to maybe one day achieve what this strategic intent suggests, right? So I think there is really, and this is, I guess, the when you do MEL and develop your project, this is how you separate. Well, what you I guess you guys are referring to, your direct result as output and outcome, but as well, how do you integrate those assumptions that are important, but you can't actually act on them because it's beyond the scope of your intervention, or it's not realistic for you to intervene on this, but it's still important. And I think it's about having the tools, the methodology, the time, the resource to be able to at least interrogate those assumptions and think about it at different point in time during the project implementation, and to see what it means for your project. So yeah, it was just some very general reflection that we had on this, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you. Kafayat has a hand, and Mary Sue, and then anyone can feel free to add some comments to the chat as well.
Okay, thank you. We're just warming up, but then I think we were reaching towards a consensus. And I think, although it might also depend on the project and what was actually happening, but from a general point of view, we were leaning towards mindset that is everybody involved in the project, particularly the participants, must have the same focus on what they want to do, on what outcome they want to achieve. And we also thought about behavioral responses or norms, that there has to be a change, the way that willingness to change, their practices or their norms, behavior, to move towards maybe sustainability, sustainable livelihood, changing their practices or their norms in different ways to achieve that outcome. And we felt that all the on all the different drivers are important. But then the power dynamics at the household level could also be important between the husband and the wife, perhaps, if they are able to achieve equitable outcomes, and this would escalate to the maybe community level and beyond. And the relationships are also important, maybe between one level or the other, one actor and the others. They are also important within the context maybe of a community, of a project, to achieve an equitable outcome. But then for enabling factors, I think we lean towards the institutions. The enabling factors have to be there, or the conditions have to be there to help sustain those practices that are sustainable, or to help embed the practices that are sustainable and for sustainability. Otherwise, everything comes crashing down. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapaya. And I think as colleagues are saying, there is a lot of overlap and interconnection. The domains of change are really supposed to help us know where to zoom in and out in our initiative, where to pay attention to deeper shifts. Mary Sue, our last contribution from the group.
Just very briefly, I agree with a lot of what's being said in the chat. And we said this in our own group, that there was not just one, that the actual manifestation of the change in people's lives might be in resources or resource flows, however you call it. But in fact, it's so important to pay attention to all of the domains, to monitor where that you can see change, where you might be able to contribute a small little point or make alliances with others to work better with others to push forward the change that you're trying to achieve. So they're extremely interlinked.
Thank you. Yes, and on that point, I'll hand over to Andrea. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much for the rich discussions and conversations around this. And I mean, we could talk about domains of change all day, right? Because yes, I think one of the main comments that I catched also was that all of these domains of change are important if we want to actually create change at the systems level. But what this also helps us do is how to zoom in and think, okay, these are all the domains of change that are important. And the third question was, which domains of change can my initiative realistically influence, right? And there's other domains of change that we are going to be able to, that we're going to have to keep track of, monitor, perhaps see which other initiatives, interventions are addressing them. But realistically, because our initiatives tend to be time-bound, resource-bound, we can only achieve so much, right? We can only contribute so much. And that's why we encourage, to use the domains of change to see how you can better target your interventions. Wonderful. So now let me quickly walk you through what the Kenya team actually did. So as we have discussed before, they integrated systems MEL. They used to focus mainly on behaviors and resource flows. But as the team started incorporating this systems MEL lens, they started looking at power and mindsets. So what did they do? The team redesigned the training spaces with women's group and youth in mind, and they began tracking who had a voice in decision making. This ended up shifting norms and opened up leadership roles to those previously underserved communities and groups. They also focused on relationships and institutions. So what happened was that community dialogues led to new water user committees that blended local customs with formal roles. And this reduced disputes, clarified responsibilities, and strengthened trust. And this was actually the catalytic domain, because once this domain moved, it helped shift other domains, including power, behaviors, and resource flows. So what this added up to? Charcoal dependence dropped, women were leading local governance bodies, youth co-developed farming and enterprise solutions, and we saw farmers adapting practices without outside lead or direction. So again, Different groups, different teams can prioritize different domains, but what matters is looking across multiple domains and how they connect and interact with each other. So this is what helps strategies actually match the real dynamics of the system, not necessarily what you originally intended. So again, very important what you all mentioned about how these domains overlap. Yes, absolutely, 100%. They are connected, interrelated, and that's why we don't ask you to focus on one necessarily or pick two, but you will find this is just a conceptual framework to help you bring, these domains, these dimensions to the front. But in practice, you will be mixing and matching and combining and seeing these overlappings happen in practice. Okay. So let's move on. I am excited because some of you have mentioned assumptions, and this is part of what we will discuss in the coming areas. So we are going to be touching upon system boundaries and how to define them, and also the spheres of control, influence, and interest. So just to gauge, if you are familiar with these concepts, can you just give me a reaction if you've heard about these terms before, or if they're new to you? Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so I see some people giving me reactions, and for some people it's new. Okay, wonderful. We hope to meet you where you are. And again, something to highlight, because I've been seeing these really rich discussions on the chat, is that this is a simplification of how you would do systems MEL in practice, because we only have 4 sessions and we're trying to convey concepts as clearly as possible. So please bear with us, and we will have time on the 4th session to do deeper dives and to explore these tensions and contradictions in more depth. Okay. So talking about the system boundaries. What are these and why they matter? So boundaries are what help you define what is in your focus and what's not. They help you see where to concentrate your effort, what to track, and where change is most likely to happen. Very important to mention that system boundaries are not only geographic. They can be drawn around actors, institutions, relationships, or even the time window that you care about. Setting system boundaries helps teams to clarify the scope of both MEL and the intervention. It helps prioritize what matters most for learning. It helps staying realistic about what you can actually influence, and it helps notice whose perspective is deciding what's inside and outside of your scope. Very important to highlight that boundaries are about focus. They're not fences. They help us see the part of the system where we are meaningfully engaging while staying aware that there's more happening outside our immediate work, right? So when we talk about system boundaries, we try to think about where we are acting, where is our focus specifically. So when we define system boundaries, and you can find more information on this on the website, including step-by-step instructions, but just to walk you through the process, we start by reconnecting to the strategic intent. So we ask, what part of the system needs to shift for us to move towards that long-term change? And that is what helps boundaries be tied to purpose, right? So then we think about 2 levels of boundaries. And again, this is a conceptual, flexible framework that you can take as needed. So we talk about the core boundary, which is where your initiative acts directly. And these are the actors, interactions, and feedback loops you work with day to day, as well as the geography, of course. And then we talk about a broader boundary. And this is the larger landscape that shapes our work. This could be climate trends, regional markets, national policies, or global chains. You don't need to act directly on those. They're not necessarily inside your system of focus, but they influence your outcomes and they do need to be observed. Why does it matter to pay attention to both layers of boundaries? As we know, many forces in complex systems sit outside the project's reach. And in traditional MEL, or the dominant paradigm MEL, they often get treated as assumptions, right? But if you name them as part of your broader boundary, that gives you a way to track the signals that might be shaping your work. And so then we look at how these boundaries are being drawn and by whom. So whose perspective is actually defining these limits? We talk about often about how boundaries are political, right? Whose voice is missing? And you can use participatory mapping to help include often marginalized perspectives and bring them into view. Importantly, boundaries should evolve. They should be revisited over time. As context shift, as new actors emerge, or as strategies adjust, boundaries should be revisited. And they're meant to guide clarity, not lock teams into assumptions. Let's look at how the Kenya team for the Kenya Drylands project used these boundaries in practice. So as you all saw at the beginning, their boundary was very narrow. It was mainly around farm level productivity. They were tracking adoption, training, yields, and it helped. But they weren't seeing the upstream water tensions, the exclusion of women from land and water decisions, or that the forest loss was still tied to charcoal use. As they went deeper, they realized that those outer dynamics were shaping the results just as much as their direct work. So they expanded their boundaries, they widened their focus. Their core boundary became the actors that they worked with directly, such as the women's groups, water committees, extension agents, and local market actors. And their broader boundary included the forces that they couldn't control necessarily, but that they needed to track. And this included the national policy shifts, regional markets, climate variability, and youth migration, for example. So what was the value of this shift? Why did it matter? By naming these broader dynamics, the team stopped treating them as background assumptions. Instead, they became part of MEL, and they helped the team understand why certain challenges persisted and where they actually had real influence. And now we are going to move into the spheres of control, influence, and interest. And then we'll do a little exercise and recap of the two concepts to help ground them in practice. So again, we've covered system boundaries, and this is the part of the system that we agree to focus on, that we agree to focus our interventions on. So if boundaries tell us where we are focusing, the spheres of control, influence, and interest tell us how we engage within that space. They help us define what our role is within that space, what our agency is within that space. So we talk about the sphere of control, for instance, as what the teams deliver on a day-to-day basis, what they are directly managing, such as trainings, input deliveries, or borehole installation, as in the case of Kenya. And this typically sits within your activities and outputs if you're thinking about a more traditional M&E system. Then we have the sphere of influence. And this is where change emerges through relationships and shared efforts. You can enable this influence, but you are not directly controlling it. And this typically sits at the outcome level if you're thinking about traditional MEL. Some examples are farmers trying new practices, women's groups shaping decisions, leaders convening forums, and any policies being endorsed by the government, for example. And then you have the sphere of interest, which is what you can't really steer, but you still and learn from. And some examples are climate shocks, price swings, land disputes, etc. And so why does this matter for MEL? The spheres, and if you've worked with them, which I have, really help teams set realistic expectations. It helps you focus on contribution, not attribution. It guides learning because each sphere helps you ask different questions around your involvement and how the system is shifting. And it helps teams stay adaptive as the spheres shift and the system evolves. So they shift MEL from did we deliver X, to how are we contributing to broader change, and do we need to learn, what do we need to learn from what's outside our reach? So again, I find this extremely powerful for accountability to donors because there are certain things that are under your control, of course, but you can't be held accountable for things that you are not directly controlling, right? Like, how do you control a policy draft being endorsed, right? This is something that you would do alongside partners and that you will help enable the conditions that trigger that change, but you cannot be held directly responsible for that necessarily, just to give you an example. And so let's look at how the Kenya Drylands team uses spheres to understand their role in the system. At the beginning, they were working mainly in the sphere of control. They were delivering trainings, they were distributing inputs, etc. As the team expanded their boundaries and they brought in water governance, local committees, nearby markets, it also changed how they understood their role inside that system. And they also began to see their spheres more clearly. So over time, their sphere of influence became more visible. Farmers were testing new practices on their own. Women's groups pushed for roles in water decisions and water governance. Local leaders were convening seasonal learning forums. And again, these shifts were not controlled by the project, but the project helped create the conditions for them. And they also recognized a wider sphere of interest, the forces that they could not steer directly, but they needed to monitor to understand results, like climate shocks, price swings, land disputes that shaped outcomes even when things inside their control were going well, right? As we still deliver their forces outside our direct control that influence the effectiveness of our work. So this really helped the Kenya team to see where their influence was growing, to help manage expectations with funders and partners, to stay adaptive as new dynamics emerge, and to frame MEL around contribution and emerging dynamics. So I understand that these concepts are interlinked. This is a lot of theory to cover in just a bit. But we want to invite you to reflect on this individually. And we have this question that we invite you to respond to. And then as we see the responses, we will use this to reflect and ground the concepts a bit more. Okay, so we will give you a couple of minutes. You can scan the QR code or you can type menti.com and use this code to join the Mentimeter and respond to these questions. So we'll give you a couple minutes for this.
Thank you. Bianca's Ines is telling us that the code is not working.
We have 5 people, 6 people.
Ah,
So
okay, that's good. That's great.
yeah.
Maybe I can reshare the link.
Yeah, if for some reason your code is not working, you can join the link.
And here the link.
You can join www.menti.com and insert the code. So we have 15 people responding. Let me share my screen so we can see it. Yeah, we have 88 people who are responding, 30, yeah. So we see that many of you are thinking
Yeah,
about the second option.
it's can't get in. I can't get in either.
Yeah, sorry, I think the code is different. I am just typing it in the chat, the new one. Please feel free to use
Okay.
this one. Apologies for this.
Yeah, so we see that, thanks, Feli. We see that the second option seems to be the one that everyone is thinking about, that boundaries define where we focus, and spheres define what level of agency we have inside that focus. So Andrea, over to you to tell us how people are doing in terms of responding to this question.
So, yes, thank you, Bianca. It's exciting to see the responses come in, and you're absolutely right. So that answer, about boundaries defining where we focus and spheres defining what level of agency we have inside that focus is the one that gets closest, right? So just to reinforce the concept, which I see that many of you already got, is that the boundaries are the area of the system we choose to focus on. They define the terrain, as we say, that we're paying attention to, the actors, interactions, dynamics that matter for our strategic intent. And the spheres are our role and agency inside that terrain. So this is what we do directly, where we shape change with others, and what we need to monitor because it affects outcomes. So exciting to see that that the concept was understood and was clear. And just a quick reminder that as boundaries shift, the spheres shift as well. So for instance, if you widen your boundary, for instance, to include local markets or migration, your spheres also change. You might gain new areas you can influence, you may need to track new external forces, and what you control becomes one piece of a larger picture. So we are reaching the end of our session. And of course, we had so much to cover. So let me just, what we're going to do, to be completely honest, we had planned to go over the spiral today, and we had some examples around this, but since we are getting tight on time and we do want to get you to let us know which how-to sheets are more important, I will just do a very brief overview of the spiral, and then I will pass it on to my colleague Bianca to guide you to the place on the website where you can look at both the orientation lens and the spiral tools that we've included, and then we'll have you vote on which of these tools are more important for you, are prioritized for you, so that we can cover them on the subsequent session. And we'll also finalize the spiral on the next session. But just to give you a quick introduction of the spiral, first of all, we finally covered all of the orientation lens, all the pieces that help us get grounded before acting, again, strategic intent, system boundaries, the spheres of influence, and the domains of change. So what is the spiral? The spiral is a learning loop that helps teams walk through implementation with a systems lens. It helps teams pause, make sense of what's changing, and stay aligned while staying aligned with your purpose and vision. So it helps teams stay responsive as new patterns show up. It helps teams revisit direction and boundaries as the system shifts, which is a step that we do typically in revisit boundaries. It helps teams surface patterns, which is, for instance, looking for signals of change, which are these small qualitative shifts that let us know that there's something changing in the system, as well as tracking your system's informed indicators. And they also help us shift course or adjust your strategy if that is needed, right? We do it before the issues become bigger, and that's why it's important to be constantly having this learning loop and looking at our evidence, looking at our data, together with our partners to make sure that we adjust our strategy before, you know, a lot of time passes. And this is something that, as we all may have experienced, we typically pay attention to the data when it's time for reporting or for a midterm evaluation or a final evaluation. But what the spiral invites you to is to conduct this exercise at a continuous level, right? And then you would cultivate coherence, which is bringing people back into alignment after any changes in your scope or in your strategies. You bring people in. But actually, as we all know, you're always cultivating coherence, right? You're always trying to create a collective vision of work with your partners. And you do this throughout your project cycle or when you work in your portfolios and programs. Okay, so this is just a teaser on the spiral at this point. And then I will pass it on to my colleague Bianca, so you can share, Bianca, the entry points by orientation lens and the spiral. We'll give you a couple minutes to log into to enter the website and look at these tools. And then we'll ask you which tools you find more interesting to walk through the next time.
Thanks, Andrea. Here, as you can see, we have under the resources section, we have 360 systems MELS tools. And here you can find the how-to sheets. We have how to define strategic intent, how to define systems boundaries. So please go here and take a look. And we want to ask you which tool you want us to focus more next time, because it's a lot of, as you can see, we have a lot of concepts, a lot of tools, which is super nice. So, but next time we want to focus on one of these ones so you can learn properly how to use one of these. So please have a look. I'm sharing my screen too. Please have a look. And then my colleague Federica is going to share in the chat the Mentimeter code. So you can go to Mentimeter right now after you have like checked this out. For example, here we have the leverage points, how to do systems mapping for MEL, how to define the spheres of control, how to develop system-informed theory of change, how to define domains of change, how to do power mapping, how to develop learning questions. So please, right now, go to Mentimeter. Fede, were you able to share the code?
Yes.
And the chat? Or here you can scan this code as well. And I'm going to launch the Mentimeter right now. So you can start voting using the Mentimeter code that we shared with you on the chat. It's the same code as we used before. So if you can go and access that, please let us know if you, we know we ran out a bit of time. We just have 1 minute left, but please let us know what you are thinking so we can also provide you with good information next time. Yeah, thanks a lot. Oh, how to develop a systems-informed theory of change, how to identify leverage points. Thanks for sharing that. So for now, this is winning, the one on developing systems-informed theories of change, how to do power map, second, how to do systems mapping, how to do power mapping. These are the ones winning. So thanks a lot. We have 24 people participating, 73 that are active entering. We're gonna give 1 more minute so you can quickly share your preference for next time. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, please keep sharing your vote. I'm gonna stop here, Andrea, so you can just wrap up. And please share your comments and feedback by email or in the chat. We already have a lot of feedback so we can improve next time. But yeah, thanks a lot. Over to you, Andrea.
Yes, no, this is wonderful. Thank you all. And we are gathering all of your perspectives. So Based on your input, we will prioritize a couple of how-to sheets to go through next time. We will finish walking through the spiral, but before we let you go, we do have another exciting take-home assignment for you all. So let me just show you where you can find it. And my colleague Fede will also be sharing that via email. So just give me 1 second. The assignment is going to be, well, about the domains of change, obviously, but we are going to be also asking you to come up with signals, early signals of change for those domains of change. Okay, so and you can find information on the early signals of change on the specific how-to sheet that we link on the homework form, and then we will open up the next session to revisit how to draft these early signals of change, relating them to the domains of change. Okay, so that is what's happening. You can use your own work as you did for the strategic intent, but if you also want to create a case study, that is completely acceptable. We just want you to practice using these tools and approaches. Amazing. So that is that. If you do have any, I mean, we appreciate all the rich conversation and feedback on the chat. Feel free to continue sharing feedback on the chat. But also, if you want to share something directly, either questions that we will be able to answer in the Ask Me Anything session, 4th session in early December, or any feedback or reactions, you can also use Mentimeter to do so. Okay, so that covers it for today. Thank you all for your active participation. We are very, very happy to see the high engagement from you all. And thank you for bringing all of this energy to the sessions.